In the winter of 1970, my family and I embarked on what we believed would be a new beginning. My father, Roger, had recently acquired a sprawling 200-acre farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. It was an old, weathered structure, but to us, it symbolized hope and a fresh start. My mother, Carolyn, was enamored by the charm of the house. She would often say, "This house has character. It's seen generations come and go." We were a big family, with 5 daughters with boundless energy and dreams. The vastness of the property promised endless adventures. On our first day, as we unloaded boxes and explored our new home, an unsettling incident occurred. Our dog, Sadie, refused to enter the house. She stood at the threshold, growling and barking, her eyes fixed on something unseen. We coaxed, pleaded, but she remained rooted, unwilling to cross the doorway. That night, the atmosphere inside the house felt heavy. The wind howled outside and the old wooden floors creaked with every step. As we settled into our rooms, an eerie silence enveloped the house, broken only by the occasional distant whisper of the wind. The following morning, we discovered Sadie lying motionless in the yard. There were no visible injuries, no signs of a struggle. It was as if she had simply stopped. The loss of our loyal companion cast a shadow over our new beginning. Despite the tragic start, we tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. We unpacked, arranged furniture, and began to make the house our own. But subtle anomalies began to surface. Clocks stopped at 3:07 a.m., doors creaked open on their own, and cold spots appeared in certain rooms. One evening, as my sisters and I played in the living room, a sudden chill swept through the room. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the lights flickered. We huddled together, unsure of what had just occurred. My mother began to wake up with unexplained bruises on her arms and legs. She dismissed them at first, attributing them to the moving process. But as days turned into weeks, the bruises became more frequent and pronounced. One night, she confided in my father, "Roger, I feel like something is watching me. I can't explain it, but it's there." He tried to reassure her, suggesting it was just the stress of the move, but deep down, we all sensed that something was amiss. The house, once a symbol of hope, began to feel oppressive. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick with unease. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. It started with the little things. One night, I was brushing my teeth upstairs when I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned, toothbrush still in hand. No one was there. I called out, "Nancy, Cindy," but no answer. Just silence, and the sound of someone breathing. Right behind me, I froze. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination. That old houses made noises, that floorboards creaked. But it didn't feel like the house was breathing. It felt like someone was in the room. That was only the beginning. Our clocks stopped every night, always at the same time. 3:07 a.m. Note, 3:05, not 3:10. Always 3:07. I remember my mother staring at the kitchen clock one morning. It was frozen at that exact moment. She reset it, changed the batteries, but the next morning, 3:07 again. It became routine, like the house was marking that time for something we couldn't understand. One morning, Cindy came into the kitchen, pale as a sheet. She whispered to Mom, "Mom, someone was whispering to me while I slept." Mom knelt down beside her. "Maybe it was one of your sisters talking in their sleep." Cindy shook her head. "No, it was coming from inside the wall. They were whispering, 'There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall.'" My heart stopped. I remember Mom's face. She didn't say a word, just pulled Cindy close and held her tight. The nights become longer after that. We started sleeping with the lights on. The hallway light would flicker randomly, and we could hear footsteps above us, even when everyone was downstairs. At first, we thought it was just the age of the house. Pipes knocking, old wood settling. But then, the knocking started coming from inside the closets, from under the beds. And then, it touched us. Carolyn, our mother, began to complain of sharp pains, like someone sticking pins in her skin. At night, we'd hear her wake up with a gasp, breathing heavily, as if something had just pulled her from a dream or from somewhere else. She told Dad, "It feels like someone is beside me, like someone is lying in the bed with me, breathing into my neck." I could tell Dad didn't know what to say. He was a man of logic. He wanted to fix it, but how do you fix something you can't see? One night, as we were all getting ready for bed, the heavy wooden door to the basement creaked open on its own. No wind, no draft, just slow, deliberate movement, like someone opening it from the other side. Dad walked over and closed it. He locked it. The next morning, it was open again. That basement became a place we avoided. It was cold, even in the middle of summer. You could feel something there, something watching. I never went down alone. None of us did. As time passed, we began to notice another pattern. My mother seemed different, tired all the time, distant. She would stand in the middle of the living room, staring at nothing, lips moving, but no sound coming out. Once, I found her standing by the window in the early hours of the morning, her eyes fixed on the woods. "He's in the trees," she said, almost dreamlike. "Who is?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away. We didn't understand it then, but the house was choosing her. It wasn't just haunting us randomly. It had picked someone. It was getting stronger, and it was feeding on her fear, her energy. There were times when she'd cry for no reason, and other times when she'd lash out at us, at Dad, completely unlike herself. The house was changing her, and we were helpless to stop it. They say a house remembers. Ours did more than remember. It whispered. At first, we thought we were just being haunted by something, but we had no name for it, no identity, only shadows, sounds, and feelings. That is, until we heard the name, Bathsheba Sherman. I still remember the first time my mother said her name out loud. The words tasted bitter in the air, like poison. It was a local historian who brought the story to us. My mother had gone into town, desperate for answers. The strange occurrences in our home were getting worse. Scratches, bruises, possessions moving on their own. She was searching through town records, asking anyone who would listen if they knew anything about our house. That's when she was told. That house, it belonged to Bathsheba Sherman once. God help you all. Bathsheba was a woman from the 1800s. She lived on that very land, and the stories, oh God, the stories were terrifying. They said she was a witch, that she practiced dark rituals in the woods, that animal would die mysteriously around her property, crops would rot, children would get sick, and then there was the baby. One of the darkest legends said Bathsheba had been found standing over her infant son's crib. The child was dead, his skull pierced by a sewing needle, tiny, precise, surgical. They said she was caught in the act, in the midst of some kind of sacrifice. But Bathsheba never went to trial. The courts didn't convict her. Instead, she was left to rot in the community, hated and seared. They say she cursed the land before she died, cursed any woman who dared to live on it, especially a mother. I remember that night clearly. My mother came home, her hands shaking, her eyes wide and glassy. She laid the old documents on the kitchen table, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, names, dates, deaths, so many deaths. She hung herself from that tree, my mother whispered. She proclaimed her soul to Satan and swore no one would ever take her home. She sacrificed her own baby to him, and then she died cursing the land. That's when the pieces started to fit. The entity in the house hated my mother. She was the one under attack, always the one being pulled, scratched, whispered to in the dark. The one who began to lose time, who wandered without knowing, who wept and screamed and couldn't remember why. Bathsheba hadn't just haunted our home. She had claimed it, and she was trying to claim my mother too. Strange things began to happen around my mother's body. Sometimes we'd find marks of bruises in the shape of fingers around her wrists and ankles. Once, she woke up with a small wound on her leg, like a needle had punctured the skin. Just like the stories, she started hearing things no one else could. She'd wake up screaming, "Get out of my house! Don't take my children! Don't take my children!" But she wasn't talking to us. She was speaking to someone else. And then she stopped eating. She barely slept. She looked pale, sunken, like something was draining her from the inside out. And sometimes when she looked at us, I swear to you, it wasn't behind her eyes. She spoke in strange phrases, in a voice lower than hers. Once she stood in the hallway and said, "This is my land. My blood waters the roots. My flesh is in the walls." We were frozen. "Who are you talking to, Mom?" I asked. She turned to me and whispered, smiling, "Not your mother." The air in the house changed after that. Heavier, like you had to push your way through it. Rooms felt colder. We heard voices calling our names from places no one stood. Doors slammed. Objects were thrown across the room once. A chair levitated and smashed into the fireplace while we were all sitting at dinner. My father finally said what none of us dared to. "There's something in this house, something evil, and it had a name, Bathsheba." But it wasn't just her. Through old records, we discovered that many women who lived in the house before us had met horrifying ends. Suicides, murders, children who died young, women who went mad and vanished. It was like a stain on the land stretching back a century. Bathsheba might have been the worst, but she wasn't the only one. Still, she was the one who stayed, the one who whispered, the one who hated, the one who watched us from the darkest corners, always waiting to step forward and finish what she started. You never think it'll be your own mother. Not really. In stories, possession always feels far away from something that happens to strangers, people, in books or movies. But when it happens in your home, when it's your mother who changes before your eyes, it doesn't feel like a story anymore. It feels like war. And we were losing her. It started slow, like a shadow that wouldn't move with the light. My mother, Carolyn, was always the strongest of us. Warm, smart, the kind of woman who could patch up a skinned knee with one hand and calm a stormy household with the other. But after Bathsheba's name entered our lives, something in her began to crack. She would stand still for long periods of time, staring at the same spot on the wall, like she was reading words no one else could see. We'd call her name, and it would take her the full 5 seconds to respond, as if she was waking up from someplace far, far away. And when she did speak, her voice wasn't always hers. I remember one night I found her in the kitchen. The lights were off. The stove was on. She was standing with her hand over the flame, not even flinching. I screamed, "Mom, what are you doing?" She turned to me slowly. Her eyes were blank, void. Then she smiled, this crooked, painful smile, like her face didn't remember how to make the shape. "It doesn't hurt," she said. "Not anymore." And she walked past me without another word. After that, things escalated. I didn't know what to expect when they arrived. All I knew was we were desperate. We had tried everything, doctors, priests, even pretending everything was fine, but nothing was fine. And my mother was slipping away like a ghost in daylight. So when my father said he'd contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, all I could do was hope that they weren't frauds, hope that whatever this darkness in our house, they could see it and stop it. They arrived on a cloudy morning. I remember how Lorraine stepped out of the car first. She was small, delicate, but she carried herself like she was walking into battle. Then came Ed, tall, calm, steady. He had this look in his eyes, like he'd already seen every kind of evil and refused to back down from any of it. When they crossed the threshold into our home, Lorraine paused, just for a second. Then she looked at my father and said quietly, "Something terrible happened here." And it never left. They didn't waste time. Ed started with interviews talking to us, one by one, asking about noises, shadows, cold spots, dreams. Every answer seemed to build a map in his head, a blueprint of something invisible. Lorraine wandered the halls in silence. She touched the walls with her fingertips, stood in corners with her eyes closed, whispered things under her breath. Then she came to the basement. She didn't want to go down at first, but eventually she did. She was down there for maybe 5 minutes, When she came back up, her face was pale. Her eyes are glassy. She pulled Ed aside and whispered something that made the blood drain from his face. That's when we knew. Whatever this thing was, they had seen it too. Later that night, they sat us down. What they told us wasn't easy to hear. "Your house has a presence," Ed said. "Several, actually. But one is dominant. We believe it's Bathsheba Sherman." Lorraine added she practiced witchcraft, cursed the land, and when she died, she didn't leave. They believed Bathsheba had latched onto my mother, that her soul had been claimed like property in a deal signed in blood. It sounded insane, but it felt true. Every word. They explained their process of what they called a demonic infestation, a step-by-step takeover. First it haunts, then it oppresses, finally it possesses. We were already deep in the second stage. "If we don't act soon," Ed warned, "your wife may not be your wife anymore." My father asked what they planned to do. Ed looked at him and said plainly, "We perform an exorcism." But it wasn't so simple. They couldn't just perform one on their own. The church had to approve it. And the church, well, they didn't approve things easily. So in the meantime, the Warrens set up equipment, cameras, recorders, crucifixes, holy water. They spent every night in our home. And things only got worse. Lorraine would often sit alone in the living room, holding her rosary, whispering prayers. I once asked her, "Aren't you afraid?" She smiled sadly. "Every day, but that's why I'll pray." There was something both beautiful and terrifying in her eyes, like she knew darkness intimately, but refused to let it swallow her. Then one night, it attacked. We were all in the dining room. Ed was reviewing footage. Lorraine was in the hallway. My mother was upstairs, resting. Suddenly, there was a crash. Then a scream. We ran up the stairs and found my mother levitating above the bed. She was thrashing violently, eyes rolled back, mouth open in a silent howl. The lights flickered. The air smelled like sulfur and rot. Lorraine grabbed her cross. Ed shouted for my father to hold her down. My sisters were crying. I was frozen. "She's not fully gone," Lorraine shouted. "She's still fighting." After what felt like hours, the episode ended. She collapsed into the bed, unconscious but breathing. Lorraine turned to us and said, "We can't wait anymore. Whether the church agrees or not, we have to save her." That night, they called for help. A priest, a friend, anyone who would listen. They began preparing for the ritual, because what we had wasn't just a haunting, it was a war for a soul. And it was just beginning. She'd vanish for hours inside the house, and we'd find her in the cellar, standing in the dark, barefoot on the cold stone floor, whispering to the walls. One time she was humming a lullaby, but none of us recognized the tune. It wasn't one she ever sang to us growing up. When we asked her who she was talking to, she looked surprised. "The baby," she answered. "He cries at night. She wants him quiet." We didn't know what to do. My father tried everything, doctor's visits, sedatives, prayers, but nothing worked. Nothing touched what was happening to her. Because this wasn't an illness. It was an infestation. The bruises started next. Purple, angry marks along her arms and legs, as if something was grabbing her at night. She claimed she didn't remember how they got there, but I noticed how they formed in the same places each time, as if something was pulling her down, holding her. There were scratches too thin and long like fingernails, but they were always on her back, places she couldn't reach. At night, I'd hear her talking in her sleep. At first, it was just murmuring. Then it became names. Then numbers. Then screams. Once, she sat up in bed, eyes wide open, and shrieked, "She's inside me." We ran to her, and she was drenched in sweat, shivering, but she didn't remember saying it. Or so she claimed. Deep down, we knew. It wasn't her anymore. Not fully. The breaking point came one evening. It was late, and we were all in the living room. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. The kind that waits to pounce. Suddenly, we heard a crash in the kitchen. When we got there, the chairs were upside down, the table flipped. My mother stood in the middle of it all, holding a butcher knife. Her hair was hanging in front of her face. Her nightgown was soaked in something we prayed was just wine from the broken bottle on the floor. She didn't even look at us. "She wants blood," she whispered. "She wants mine. Or yours." My father slowly approached her, speaking soft and low. "Carolyn, honey, it's me. It's Roger. Put the knife down." She turned to him, and in that moment, I swear I saw her eyes go pitch black. Not just dark, empty. "You can't protect them," she growled. "You never could." That voice, it was not hers. It was deeper, crueler, cold, and ancient. It had weight, like it had lived 100 lifetimes of hatred, and was now wearing my mother like a mask. My father managed to disarm her that night, but none of us slept. We couldn't, because now we knew without any doubt she was being consumed. Something had taken root in her soul, and it was growing. From that day forward, my mother began slipping further away. She avoided us during the day. She'd sit in silence for hours, her eyes glassy, her hands twitching. She stopped calling us by name, and instead muttered strange phrases in Latin or something that sounded like it. Sometimes we'd hear her sobbing in the bathroom, only to open the door and find her standing in front of the mirror, smiling. One night, I swear I saw her reflection move after she had already turned away. That's when I knew we weren't just haunted by Bathsheba. She had found a vessel, and that vessel was my mother. We had no more time to wait. Whatever was inside her was getting stronger, feeding off her, trying to replace her entirely. We needed help. Real help. That's when we turned to the Warrens. I didn't know what to expect when they arrived. All I knew was we were desperate. We had tried everything. Doctors, priests, even pretending everything was fine. But nothing was fine. And my mother was slipping away like a ghost in daylight. So when my father said he'd contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, all I could do was hope. Hope that they weren't frauds. Hope that whatever this darkness in our house, they could see it and stop it. They arrived on a cloudy morning. I remember how Lorraine stepped out of the car first. She was small, delicate, but she carried herself like she was walking into battle. Then came Ed, tall, calm, steady. He had this look in his eyes, like he'd already seen every kind of evil and refused to back down from any of it. When they crossed the threshold into our home, Lorraine paused, just for a second. Then she looked at my father and said quietly, "Something terrible happened here," and it never left. They didn't waste time. Ed started with interviews, talking to us one by one, asking about noises, shadows, cold spots, dreams. Every answer seemed to build a map in his head, a blueprint of something invisible. Lorraine wandered the halls in silence. She touched the walls with her fingertips, stood in corners with her eyes closed, whispered things under her breath. Then she came to the basement. She didn't want to go down at first, but eventually she did. She was down there for maybe 5 minutes. When she came back up, her face was pale. Her eyes are glassy. She pulled Ed aside and whispered something that made the blood drain from his face. That's when we knew. Whatever this thing was, they had seen it too. Later that night, they sat us down. What they told us wasn't easy to hear. "Your house has a presence," Ed said. "Several, actually, but one is dominant. We believe it's Bathsheba Sherman," Lorraine added. "She practiced witchcraft, cursed the land, and when she died, she didn't leave." They believed Bathsheba had latched onto my mother, that her soul had been claimed, like property in a deal signed in blood. It sounded insane, but it felt true, every word. They explained their process of what they called a demonic infestation, a step-by-step takeover. First, it haunts, then it oppresses, finally, it possesses. We were already deep in the second stage. "If we don't act soon," Ed warned, "your wife may not be your wife anymore." My father asked what they planned to do. Ed looked at him and said plainly, "We perform an exorcism." But it wasn't so simple. They couldn't just perform one on their own. The church had to approve it, and the church, well, they didn't approve things easily. So in the meantime, the Warrens set up equipment, cameras, recorders, crucifixes, holy water. They spent every night in our home, and things only got worse. Lorraine would often sit alone in the living room, holding her rosary, whispering prayers. I once asked her, "Aren't you afraid?" She smiled sadly every day, "But that's why I pray." There was something both beautiful and terrifying in her eyes, like she knew darkness intimately, but refused to let it swallow her. Then, one night, it attacked. We were all in the dining room. Ed was reviewing footage. Lorraine was in the hallway. My mother was upstairs, resting. Suddenly, there was a crash, then a scream. We ran up the stairs and found my mother levitating above the bed. She was thrashing violently, eyes rolled back, mouth open in a silent howl. The lights flickered. The air smelled like sulfur and rot. Lorraine grabbed her cross. Ed shouted for my father to hold her down. My sisters were crying. I was frozen. "She's not fully gone," Lorraine shouted. "She's still fighting." After what felt like hours, the episode ended. She collapsed into the bed, unconscious but breathing. Lorraine turned to us and said, "We can't wait anymore. Whether the church agrees or not, we have to save her." That night, they called for help. A priest, a friend, anyone who would listen. They began preparing for the ritual, because what we had wasn't just a haunting. It was a war for a soul, and it was just beginning. The night the exorcism finally began, the house felt heavier than ever, like the darkness itself was pressing in on us. The air was thick and cold, and every sound seemed louder. Our breaths, footsteps, even the distant ticking of a clock. We gathered in the bedroom where my mother lay, pale and trembling on the bed. Ed and Lorraine stood close by with the priest who had come at their request. My father held my mother's hand tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Ed opened his Bible and raised a small vial of holy water. Lorraine whispered prayers softly, her voice steady but urgent. The priest began the rite, his voice firm and commanding. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I command you leave this woman." Suddenly, my mother's body tensed violently. Her eyes snapped open, but they were not her eyes. They were black and wild, full of fury. A deep, guttural voice poured out of her mouth, chilling every bone in the room. "You cannot have her." The room shook. Candles flickered and sputtered. The bed rocked beneath her. We all froze, terrified, but Ed kept going, holding the Bible high and sprinkling holy water on her. Lorraine stepped closer, holding up a silver cross. "Begone, demon, in the name of Christ, leave this place." The voice inside my mother laughed, a harsh, echoing sound that seemed to mock us all. "You think a cross can stop me? I've been here longer than your God has." Her body twisted unnaturally, limbs bending at impossible angles. She screamed, an unearthly scream that pierced the night. Blood dripped from her mouth. The smell of sulfur filled the room. Ed and the priest pressed on, reciting prayers, faster and louder. Lorraine's voice joined theirs, trembling but strong. My father clung to my mother's hand, whispering words of love and encouragement. "She is mine. She belongs to me." The demon spat through her lips. The struggle lasted hours. Each prayer was met with fury, each holy word answered with curses. My mother's skin was bruised and cut, marks we knew she didn't make herself. Finally, as dawn crept through the windows, her body went limp. Her breathing steadied. Her eyes fluttered open, clear and tired. We all exhaled a fragile, trembling hope blooming in our chests. The demon had retreated, but we knew this was only the beginning of a long battle. Ed warned us that the possession might return, stronger than before. That morning, as the first light touched the walls, we held on to the small victory. My mother was back, at least for now. After that first night of the exorcism, I thought the worst was behind us, but I was wrong. The battle for my mother's soul dragged on for days, weeks even. Every time we thought she was safe, the darkness would lash out again. It was relentless, exhausting. My mother was trapped inside her own body, torn between the light and the shadow. Sometimes she would be calm and loving, the woman I remembered. But then, sudden fits of rage or despair would consume her. She would scream at us, curse at us, call out the demon's name. At times, her voice would change completely, deep, cruel, inhuman. The Warrens stayed with us through it all. They brought their equipment, EMF meters, cameras, audio recorder, to try and capture evidence of the supernatural. Some nights, the devices went haywire. Lights flickered. Strange noises echoed through the walls. Lorraine said the entity was growing stronger, feeding off our fear. Ed became our anchor. He worked tirelessly, speaking words of faith and hope when we had none left. Lorraine's prayers became the soundtrack of those long nights. I would watch her sit by my mother's bedside, clutching her rosary, tears streaming down her face, refusing to leave. My father was a different kind of warrior. He stayed by my mother's side every moment he could. He whispered promises of love and protection, reminding her of who she was beneath the devil's grip. Sometimes he would break down in tears, but he never gave up. One night, after a particularly violent episode, my mother collapsed in exhaustion. We thought she might finally be free, but Ed warned us that the demon was cunning. It was biding its time, waiting for a chance to strike again. We realized then that this wasn't just an exorcism. It was a war, and it was far from over. As days bled into nights, the weight of what we were living through pressed down on all of us like a suffocating fog. The house no longer felt like home. It had become a battlefield where unseen forces clashed, where every corner held a threat, and where the person we loved was slipping further away from us. It was the breaking point. My mother's condition worsened dramatically. One evening, after a terrifying episode, she was left shaking and pale, barely able to speak. Her eyes, once so full of warmth, were clouded and distant. The demon inside her seemed to be winning the fight, and we were losing ground fast. The terror was no longer something we could deny. It was real, cruel, and merciless. Ed and Lorraine tried everything within their power: rituals, prayers, holy water, blessings. They were our lifeline, our last hope, but even their faith seemed to strain under the relentless assault. Lorraine would cry silently in corners. Wiping away tears, she refused to show us, and Ed looked older each day, his face lined with exhaustion and worry. One night, I remember sitting in the living room alone, the house eerily quiet after another violent confrontation upstairs. I was scared out of my mind, but felt paralyzed. I whispered a prayer, even though I wasn't sure I believed it would do any good. Then, from the bedroom came the most blood-curdling scream I had ever heard. Raw, primal, filled with pain and rage. I ran to the room and found my mother thrashing violently on the bed. The sheets were tangled around her like a prison. Her voice wasn't hers anymore. It was distorted, guttural, coming from a place beyond human. She shouted, "You will never take me." Lorraine appeared at my side, her face pale but resolute. "Hold her, don't let go." We all grabbed hold of her, struggling against a force that was not visible, but terrifyingly real. The room spun. Objects flew off shelves. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging us into darkness, save for the flickering candles Lorraine had lit. Ed began chanting prayers in Latin, his voice a firm anchor in the chaos. "Exorcizo te, omnis immunda spiritus." The demon fought back fiercely. It screamed insults and threats, mocking our faith. "You are weak, you are nothing." But we held on. We prayed harder. The struggle lasted hours. My mother's body convulsed. Her screams echoed through the night. Then slowly, the violent thrashing began to subside. Her breathing became steady. The room grew still. When the dawn's first light crept through the windows, my mother was finally silent, exhausted but free, at least for now. But even in that fragile peace, we knew the war was far from over. The demon was cunning and patient, and it had not given up its claim. That night I understood what true faith meant. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it head on. Even when hope feels lost. After weeks of relentless torment, we knew the final confrontation was coming. The demon's hold on my mother had grown stronger, but so had our resolve. Ed and Lorraine were determined to see this through to the end, no matter how hard the fight would be. The air in the house was thick with tension. Every creak of the floorboards or whisper of wind felt like a warning. We gathered again in the bedroom, which had become the epicenter of the battle. The room felt charged with an energy that was almost unbearable. Ed held his Bible tightly, Lorraine clutched her rosary, and the priest prepared to lead the last rites. My family and I stood close, united in prayer and hope. The demon wasn't silent this time. As the prayers began, my mother's eyes snapped open, black and fiery. Her voice was cold, bitter, sliced through the silence. "You think you can banish me? I have lived in this house longer than you can imagine." She twisted her body in unnatural ways, convulsing violently. The room shook, the windows rattling in their frames. The candles guttered and flickered, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, trying to swallow us whole. Ed's voice rose above the chaos. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave this woman and never return." The demon screamed in fury. "This house, this soul, belongs to me." Lorraine moved closer, her voice steady but fierce as she recited prayers and sprinkled holy water over my mother. The struggle was brutal. My mother's body jerked and twisted, and the cries of pain and rage filled the room. We held her down, refusing to let go, refusing to give in. The hours dragged on, a battle of wills between good and evil. Finally, as dawn broke, the violent convulsions slowed. My mother's body relaxed, her breathing deep and even. Her eyes cleared, the blackness fading away. The room was silent, except for the sound of her soft, trembling breaths. The demon was gone. We didn't celebrate. We were too exhausted, too wary. We knew the darkness had been pushed back, but never completely defeated. That morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. Fragile, yes, but real. And I knew, no matter what happened next, we had fought with everything we had. The days following the final exorcism were surreal. The oppressive darkness that had once engulfed our home began to lift, replaced by a cautious calm. My mother slowly regained her strength, her laughter returning like a fragile flower, blooming after a long, harsh winter. It felt like we were breathing fresh air for the first time in what seemed like forever. But even as life returned to normal, the experience left scars both visible and invisible. Our family had been forever changed by what we endured. The memories of those nights, the sounds, the terror, the unrelenting presence of evil, it all lingered in the corners of my mind. The Warrens stayed with us for some time, helping to cleanse the house and offering guidance on how to protect ourselves. They explained that the demon we faced was powerful and cunning, that it had chosen my mother for a reason we might never fully understand. They told us stories of similar cases, reminding us that these battles between good and evil happen far more often than people realize. I spent many hours reflecting on what faith truly meant. It wasn't simply believing in something unseen. It was about confronting the darkest parts of life and holding on to hope when all seemed lost. I saw firsthand how faith, love, and determination could push back the shadows. Years later, that house still stands in Rhode Island. To outsiders, it looks like any other old home. But to us, it carries the weight of a haunting, one that tested the limits of human endurance and faith. Some say the Warrens' case files on this haunting help shape the way exorcisms are approached even today. I tell you this story not just to recount what happened, but to remind us all of the fragile line between light and darkness. To remind us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. And sometimes, the strongest battles are the ones we fight within our own walls, within our own hearts.
Did you enjoy this content? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Support us with a like and subscribe so our channel can reach more people. Thanks for watching until the end.